My wife stood in our kitchen and told me she'd found her true love. Said his name was Dean. Said he worked construction. Said he didn't care about my money. Didn't care about the house. Didn't care about any of it. Said he loved her for her. I set down my coffee, looked her dead in the eye, and smiled. Then I picked up my phone, called my assistant, and said 3 things. Cancel her credit cards. Cut off her mother's medication coverage. Change the locks on my house. She thought I was bluffing. She had no idea what was coming. My name is Holloway Pierce. I'm 49 years old. I own a commercial real estate portfolio across Houston worth somewhere north of $80 million, office towers downtown, warehouse space out by the port, a half-dozen strip centers in the suburbs that print money quietly while everyone's looking at the skyline. I built every bit of it from a single leased construction trailer and a $40,000 loan from my father in 1999. I've spent 25 years learning one lesson over and over. People only show you who they really are when they think you can't see them. My wife Renata showed me exactly who she was on a Tuesday afternoon in March, standing in the kitchen of the house I built her, holding a phone she thought I didn't know about. But before I tell you what I did, I need you to understand what I built and what she tried to take. Renata Okafor walked into my life 16 years ago at a charity gala for the Houston Children's Hospital. I was 33, already worth 8 figures on paper, still rough around the edges, still talking with my hands too much, still wearing suits that fit a little wrong because I'd bought them off the rack 2 years earlier and hadn't bothered updating my wardrobe. She was 27, working as a hospital fundraising coordinator, gorgeous in that effortless way that made every man in the room lose track of his conversation. She laughed at something I said about silent auctions being a polite form of legalized gambling, and I was done. Just like that. 25 years of being too focused on building something to notice anyone, and then one laugh from a stranger in a black dress, and I forgot my own name for a second. We dated for 14 months. I proposed at the top of the J.P. Morgan Chase Tower, rented out the observation floor for one evening, candles everywhere, a string quartet that cost more than most people's cars. She cried, said yes before I even finished the sentence. Our wedding was at the Hotel Galvez in Galveston. 220 guests, her family flown in from Lagos for the occasion, my father giving a toast that made half the room laugh and the other half cry. I remember standing at that altar thinking I'd finally built the one thing money couldn't buy on its own. A family, a partner. Someone who'd be there when the towers were just steel frames, and someone who'd still be there when they were full of paying tenants. 15 years, 2 kids, Desmond, who's 13 now, and Vivian, who just turned 10. A house in River Oaks that I designed room by room with an architect named Philip Castellano. 6 bedrooms, a wine cellar, a pool house bigger than the home I grew up in. I gave Renata everything. Not because I was trying to buy her loyalty, but because that's what you do when you love someone, and you have the means to make their life soft and beautiful. She had a black card with no limit. She had a Range Rover and, for her 40th birthday, a Bentley Bentayga in a custom shade of champagne she'd picked out herself. She had a personal trainer, a standing reservation at the spa at the Post Oak Hotel, a closet that needed its own wing. And for 15 years, I thought she loved me back. Looking back now, I can see the cracks. I just didn't want to look at them. About 2 years ago, Renata started going to a new gym, some boutique CrossFit place off Westheimer that her friend Ondine recommended. She started going 4-5 times a week. Started talking about her trainer, a guy named Dean Whitfield, with this energy in her voice I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. Dean's incredible, she'd say. Dean really pushes me. Dean says I have more potential than I realize. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself a 43-year-old woman taking pride in her body wasn't a crime, and it wasn't. It isn't. But I started noticing other things too. She started taking her phone into the bathroom when she showered. She started locking it with a 6-digit code instead of her thumbprint. She started coming home from the gym with her hair freshly washed, like she'd showered there instead of waiting to come home. I run a business empire built on noticing small details other people miss. A crack in a foundation that looks cosmetic but isn't. A tenant who pays on time every month except this one, which means something's wrong even if they haven't told you yet. I know how to read patterns. I just didn't want to read this one, because reading it meant admitting that the family I'd built, the one thing I was proudest of in this whole world, might be sitting on a foundation that was already cracked beyond repair. 3 weeks ago, I was in my home office reviewing a term sheet for a $40 million acquisition of an industrial park near Pasadena, Texas, when Renata's phone, sitting face up on the kitchen island where she'd left it while taking a call from her sister, lit up with a text. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that. I was walking past the kitchen island to refill my coffee, and the screen lit up right in front of my eyes, and I read it before I could stop myself, the way you read any bright thing that flashes in your peripheral vision. It said, "Counting down the days till Cabo. Can't wait to have you all to myself for a week. No rings, no excuses, just us." It was from a contact saved as DW. I stood there in my own kitchen holding a coffee mug, and the whole house went very quiet, the way it does right before a storm hits Houston. That strange green stillness. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't say a word. 25 years of negotiating 9-figure deals teaches you something most people never learn. The moment you reveal what you know is the moment you lose your leverage. I went back to my office, closed the door, and I called the one man in Houston who finds things other people don't want found. His name is Garrett Sloan, a former HPD detective who's done private investigation work for me twice before. Once on a business partner I suspected of skimming. Once on a contractor I thought was padding invoices. Both times he came back with airtight proof inside 2 weeks. I called him at 11 p.m. and he picked up on the second ring, because Garrett Sloan always picks up. "Mr. Pierce," he said, "it's been a while." "I need a full workup," I said. "My wife, discreet. I need to know who DW is, how long this has been going on, and I need documentation that would hold up if this ever goes to court." There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause a man gives you when he's seen this exact moment play out 100 times and knows there's nothing useful to say except get to work. "Give me 2 weeks," he said. It took him 9 days. The file Garrett sent over was 47 pages. Photographs, location data pulled from her car's onboard GPS system that I legally owned since the Bentley was titled in my name. Credit card statements from a card she didn't know I could still see activity on through our joint wealth management portal, and a timeline that made my hands shake for the first time in longer than I could remember. Dean Whitfield, 34 years old, a personal trainer at Ignite Fitness Studio on Westheimer Road. Divorced once already, no kids. Leases a 1-bedroom apartment in a mid-range complex off Voss Road. Drives a 2019 Dodge Charger with 90,000 miles on it, and a check engine light that, according to Garrett's notes, had apparently been on for at least 6 weeks. Dean Whitfield, who according to a Yelp review I found myself reading at 1 a.m. with a whiskey in my hand, really listens to his clients and makes you feel like more than just a number. The affair had been going on for 11 months. There were photographs of them at a hotel off the Sam Houston Tollway, the kind of place that rents rooms by the hour and doesn't ask questions. There were photographs of them at a taco truck on Fulton Street, laughing, her hand on his forearm. There was a receipt showing she'd paid for 2 round-trip tickets to Cabo San Lucas using a debit card linked to an account I didn't even know she had. An account that, Garrett discovered, she'd opened 8 months ago and had been quietly funneling cash into $500 here, $800 there, skimmed off the household budget I gave her full discretion over because I trusted her completely. 11 months, 2 kids in the house. A husband who built her a 6-bedroom house with his bare hands and 25 years of his life, sitting at home some of those nights reading bedtime stories to Vivian while her mother told me she was at a girls' night that was actually a hotel room off the tollway. I didn't cry. I want to be honest with you about that, because there's a version of this story where the wounded husband breaks down, and that's not what happened to me. What happened to me was colder than that. Something in my chest just went very still and very quiet, the way the market goes quiet right before a correction, and I started thinking the way I think when a deal is about to go sideways and I need to protect my position before anyone else even knows there's a problem. I didn't confront her immediately. I want you to understand the kind of patience that built my business, because it's the same patience I used here. I spent the next 4 days doing 3 things very carefully and very quietly. The first was calling my attorney, a man named Foster Bramwell, who has handled every major transaction of my professional life, and who I trust the way I trust very few people on this earth. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, the way good lawyers do, and then he said the words that mattered most. Holloway, you need a forensic accountant on this before you do anything else, because once she knows you know she's going to try to move assets, and we need a paper trail showing exactly what existed and where before that happens. So that's what I did. I brought in a forensic accountant named Priya Lakhani, who specializes in high net worth divorce preparation, and over the next week she quietly mapped every account, every card, every transfer, every piece of property in our combined names, all while Renata went to her gym sessions and her girls' nights, completely unaware that her entire financial life was being documented in granular, devastating detail. The second thing I did was something most people in my position never think to do, because most people in my position are too proud or too angry to think clearly. I had Foster quietly pull our prenuptial agreement, the one Renata had signed 16 years ago, back when she had nothing and I had everything, back when her own attorney at the time, a man her mother had insisted she hire, told her in plain English exactly what she was agreeing to. The agreement was airtight. Infidelity clause included, the kind of clause people think only exists in movies. If either party committed adultery and it could be documented, the offending party forfeited any claim to spousal support and any claim to property acquired during the marriage beyond a fixed, modest settlement. Renata had laughed when she signed it, 16 years ago, sitting across from me at Foster's office, 27 years old, and so in love she thought nothing could ever come between us. "I'll never need this clause, Holloway," she'd said, smiling, "because I'm never going anywhere." The third thing I did was the one that mattered most, the one most men in my position never have the discipline to do. I kept showing up. I kept being Holloway Pierce, husband and father, exactly as I had been every single day before I found out. I drove Desmond to his baseball practice at the fields off Buffalo Speedway. I helped Vivian with her fractions homework at the kitchen table. I kissed Renata on the cheek when I left for the office and asked her how her day was when I came home. I let her believe, completely and totally, that she still held all the cards. Because the moment a woman like Renata realizes the floor beneath her is already gone, she starts running, and I needed her standing perfectly still until every document was signed, every account was documented, and every contingency was covered. It was the hardest 2 weeks of my life. Harder than the year I almost lost everything in 2009, when 3 of my biggest tenants defaulted in the same quarter. Harder than burying my father in 2015. Because every night I'd lie next to a woman I'd loved for 16 years, knowing exactly what she'd been doing, exactly who she'd been doing it with, and exactly what I was about to do in response, and I had to look completely normal doing it. Then came the Tuesday in March. I'd come home early from a closing downtown, a deal on a 12-story office building near the Galleria that had taken 4 months to negotiate. I walked into the kitchen and found Renata sitting at the island, scrolling through her phone with this small, private smile on her face, the kind of smile you wear when you think no one's watching. She didn't hear me come in. I stood in the doorway for a second, just watching her. This woman I'd given everything to, smiling at a text from a man who drove a Dodge Charger with a check engine light that had been on for 6 weeks. "Good day?" I asked. She jumped, fumbled the phone, set it face down too quickly. "Holloway, you're home early." "Close the Galleria deal," I said, pouring myself a glass of water like it was any other Tuesday. 12 stories. Should be a good quarter." "That's wonderful, baby," she said, and the word baby landed on me like a slap, because I knew exactly which other man's name she'd probably whispered with the same softness sometime in the last 11 months. I set the glass down. And then, because I'd spent 2 weeks planning exactly how this conversation would go, I said the thing that opened the door. "Renata, we need to talk. I think something's been off between us for a while, and I want you to be honest with me. Are you happy?" I watched something shift behind her eyes. "I want you to understand. This woman had spent 16 years being underestimated by everyone who looked at her and saw only a beautiful trophy wife with nothing behind the eyes. She was smarter than that, and in that moment I watched her calculate. Fast, the way I calculate when a negotiation suddenly changes shape. She decided, I think, that the moment had simply arrived sooner than she planned, and that she might as well control how it unfolded. "Actually," she said, setting down her phone, sitting up straighter. "I'm glad you asked because I haven't been happy in a long time, Holloway. I found someone. His name is Dean. He's down to earth. He doesn't care about your money or this house or any of it. He sees me, not Holloway Pierce's wife. Me." There it was. 16 years, 2 children, a house I built board by board with an architect I personally walked through every blueprint with, and she delivered the end of it to me, sitting at a kitchen island with the same tone she'd used to tell me she'd switched dry cleaners. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, because I think people expect rage, and there was some of that, somewhere underneath. But mostly what I felt was almost peaceful. Like a man who's been carrying a 100-pound bag on his shoulders for 11 months finally getting to set it down. Because I already knew. I'd known for 2 weeks. The only thing she gave me in that moment was confirmation, spoken in her own voice, that everything Garrett Sloan and Priya Lakhani had documented was true, and that she was about to make the single biggest mistake of her adult life by saying it out loud before the paperwork was signed. I smiled at her. A real smile, the kind that confused her because it wasn't the reaction she expected. "Down to earth," I repeated. "And he doesn't care about money." "No," she said, emboldened now, mistaking my calm for weakness, the way people often do right before they learn better. "He's not like you, Holloway. He doesn't need all this." She gestured at the kitchen, the marble island, the wine fridge built into the cabinetry, the view of the pool through the window. "He loves me for me." "That's beautiful," I said, and I meant it sarcastically, but my voice stayed level. 11 months of loving you for you. Cabo next month, right? No rings, no excuses, just the 2 of you. The color drained out of her face so fast I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "How did you—" "Garrett Sloan," I said. "He's very good at his job. 47 pages, Renata. Photographs from the Sam Houston Tollway Hotel. Receipts from the taco truck on Fulton. The secret checking account you opened 8 months ago and have been feeding $500 at a time out of the household budget I trusted you to manage. Should I keep going, or do you remember the rest yourself?" She didn't say anything. Her mouth opened and closed twice, and I watched 16 years of careful performance collapse in real time on her face. I pulled out my phone. I'd had this moment planned for 2 weeks, choreographed almost, because I wanted her to understand, in the clearest possible terms, exactly what kind of mistake she had just made out loud in my kitchen. I dialed my executive assistant, a sharp, efficient woman named Carmela Ruiz, who has worked for me for 11 years and who I trust with my entire operational life. She picked up immediately. "Carmela," I said, my eyes locked on Renata's face the entire time. "I need 3 things done within the hour. First, cancel every credit card linked to the Pierce household account, all of them, effective immediately, including the supplementary cards. Second, pull up the file on Renata's mother's supplemental health coverage, the policy I've been paying out of pocket for the last 4 years, and terminate it. Third, call Briggs Security and have them send someone to the River Oaks house today to rekey every lock on the property." "Understood, Mr. Pierce," Carmela said, completely unbothered, because Carmela has worked for me long enough to know that when I give an instruction in that tone of voice, the instruction does not get discussed, it gets executed. I hung up. Renata was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "You can't do that," she said, her voice cracking now, all the confidence from 30 seconds earlier gone completely. "My mother needs that medication, Holloway. She has diabetes, she has a heart condition, you know that." "I do know that," I said. "I've known it for 4 years, which is how long I've been quietly paying for her supplemental coverage out of my own pocket because your family insurance didn't cover it and you asked me to help and I said yes, because that's what you do for family. But you just told me Dean doesn't care about money, so I'm sure he'll be thrilled to help cover it from here. You're being cruel." "I'm being honest," I said. "For the first time in 2 weeks, actually, I'm being completely honest with you. You've been lying to me for 11 months. I found out 2 weeks ago. I've spent that time making sure every account, every asset, every piece of documentation in this marriage was protected before I said a single word to you about any of it. You just confirmed everything I already knew, out loud, in my kitchen, which honestly I appreciate, because now I don't even need to play the recording for Foster. What recording? I held up my phone. The screen showed an active voice memo, still running, timestamp climbing. 25 years of negotiating deals where a verbal handshake sometimes mattered as much as a signed contract teaches you to always, always have a record. Her face went white as paper. You can't use that, she said. Texas is a one-party consent state for recordings made in your own home, you absolute snake. I am, I said, almost admiring her in that moment, the fact that some part of her brain, even mid-collapse, was still reaching for legal arguments. 16 years married to a real estate attorney's longtime client teaches you a few things. And you're right, it's perfectly admissible, since I'm a party to the conversation, and we're standing in a state that doesn't require both parties to consent. The next 40 minutes were the kind of ugly that I won't fully describe to you, because some of it doesn't need repeating, and some of it was simply two people who used to love each other watching that love curdle into something neither of us recognized. She cried. She screamed. She called me cold, calculating, said I'd never really loved her, said I only cared about control. At one point, she threw a glass of wine, not at me, just at the wall behind me, where it shattered against the custom tile backsplash I'd had imported from Italy 4 years ago for her birthday. I let her say all of it. I didn't raise my voice once. I'd had 2 weeks to feel every single emotion this situation could possibly produce, alone, in the quiet of my own office at 1 a.m. with a glass of whiskey, and by the time we stood in that kitchen, I had nothing left to feel except a strange, settled clarity. Pack a bag, I told her finally. You can stay at a hotel tonight, or you can stay with your mother, or you can stay with Dean. I genuinely don't care which. Foster will have the formal separation paperwork drawn up by Friday. You signed a prenup 16 years ago with an infidelity clause, Renata. You laughed about it at the time. I imagine you're not laughing now. You'll regret this, she said, tears streaking through her makeup, her voice low and shaking. The kids will hate you for this. That one landed harder than anything else she'd said, because it was the one thing I'd genuinely worried about over the last 2 weeks, lying awake at night. But I'd thought about it carefully, and I'd already decided what I believed to be true. The kids will be told the truth, eventually, in an age-appropriate way, by both of us, together, like adults, I said. And I think you should consider very carefully what story you want them to eventually learn, because I have 47 pages of documentation, and I'm not the one who's going to need to explain Cabo. She left that night. Not for a hotel, not for her mother's house. She went straight to Dean Whitfield's one-bedroom apartment off Voss Road, the one with the leaking kitchen faucet that Garrett's report had mentioned almost as an afterthought. I found that out 3 days later, not because I was still having her followed, but because Houston is a big city that operates like a small town once you're inside its real estate and business circles, and somebody at Ignite Fitness Studio mentioned it to somebody who mentioned it to Ondine's husband, who happened to play golf with one of my colleagues at the Houstonian. The weeks that followed moved fast in some ways and painfully slow in others. Foster Bramwell filed the separation paperwork that Friday exactly as promised. The prenup held up exactly as it was written to. Renata's attorney, a young, aggressive divorce lawyer named Theo Ashgrove who clearly thought he could rattle me, tried 3 different angles to break the agreement, claiming duress at signing, claiming the terms were unconscionable, claiming I'd hidden assets during the marriage. Priya Lakhani's forensic accounting work made the third claim laughable, since every dollar was documented with a paper trail clean enough to frame. The first 2 claims fell apart the moment Foster produced the signed acknowledgement from Renata's own independent counsel 16 years ago, the one her mother insisted she retain, confirming she understood every clause, including the infidelity provision, before she signed a single page. Renata got the settlement the prenup guaranteed her. It wasn't nothing, I want to be clear about that. I'm not a man who left his children's mother destitute. She received a one-time payment of $1.2 million, full custody arrangements that gave her equal time with Desmond and Vivian, and she kept the Bentley, since it had been a gift outright in her name. But she didn't get the River Oaks house. She didn't get a percentage of the commercial portfolio that had grown by nearly $40 million during our marriage. She didn't get spousal support, not $1, because the infidelity clause she'd laughed about 16 years ago made sure of that. Her mother's medication coverage, I want to be honest with you about this part too, because it's the part that made me feel the worst. even now. I let that cancellation stand for exactly 9 days, long enough to make the point absolutely unmistakable, long enough for Renata to fully understand what kind of protection she'd been living under without even realizing it. Then I quietly had Carmela reinstated under a separate, private arrangement that had nothing to do with Renata at all, paid directly through a trust I set up for her mother, a woman named Daisy who had genuinely never done anything to me except raise a daughter who eventually broke my heart. I didn't tell Renata I'd done it. I didn't need her gratitude. I just wasn't willing to let a 71-year-old woman with a heart condition pay the price for her daughter's choices, no matter how angry I was. Dean Whitfield, for what it's worth, did not turn out to be the down-to-earth saint Renata believed him to be. Within 4 months of her moving into his one-bedroom apartment, Garrett Sloan, who I'd kept on retainer purely out of habit at that point, mentioned almost in passing that Dean had picked up a second girlfriend, a 26-year-old client from his 6 a.m. spin class, and that the arrangement at the Voss Road apartment had become, in Garrett's words, complicated. I didn't celebrate that news. I didn't feel vindicated by it the way I might have expected to. Mostly, I just felt tired and a little sad for the version of Renata who'd once laughed beside me on top of the J.P. Morgan Chase Tower 16 years earlier, before whatever happened to us happened. The hardest conversation of the entire ordeal wasn't with Renata, and it wasn't with Foster or Garrett or Priya. It was with my son Desmond, who at 13 was old enough to understand far more than I wanted him to. He came to me about 6 weeks after Renata moved out, sitting on the edge of his bed with his basketball still in his hands from practice, and he asked me directly, "Dad, did Mom cheat on you? Is that why she left?" I sat down next to him. I thought about lying, softening it, the way some part of me wanted to protect him from the ugliness of what his mother had done. But I thought about the prenup sitting in Foster's files, about the recording still saved on my phone, about 47 pages documenting 11 months of a double life, and I decided my son deserved better than a comfortable lie. "Yes," I told him. "She did. And I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen, because you're old enough to know the truth, and someday you're going to need to know how to recognize it in your own life. But I also need you to understand something. Your mother loves you and your sister. That part was never a lie. What happened between her and me doesn't change what she is to you." He cried a little. I held him while he did. Vivienne, at 10, understood less of the specifics and more of the feelings, and some nights she still asks why Mommy doesn't live with us anymore, and Renata and I have had to learn, slowly and imperfectly, how to co-parent 2 children through a divorce that began with 47 pages of surveillance photographs and ended with a kitchen island, a shattered wine glass, and a recording that held up perfectly fine in a one-party consent state. It's been 8 months now since that Tuesday in March. The River Oaks house is quieter than it used to be, which surprised me, because I expected it to feel emptier, and instead it mostly just feels honest. Desmond made the all-star baseball team this spring, and I was at every single game, the way I always have been, the way Renata used to claim I never made time for, even though my calendar from those years would tell a different story if anyone bothered to check. Vivian has started taking piano lessons, and she's terrible at it in the specific, joyful way 10-year-olds are terrible at new things. And some evenings I sit in the living room and listen to her butcher for Elise and think it's one of the best sounds in this entire enormous quiet house. Renata and I are civil now, mostly. We've found a rhythm for the custody handoffs, Tuesdays and every other weekend at her new place, a townhouse in the Heights that the settlement money helped her secure, comfortable enough, but nothing like the life she had before. I hear through mutual acquaintances that things with Dean ended completely about 5 months ago. I hear she's working again, back in event coordination for a hospital foundation downtown, building something of her own from a much lower floor than the one she used to stand on with me. Some part of me hopes she finds whatever it was she thought she was missing in those 11 months, genuinely. 16 years is a long time to share a life with someone, and even after everything, I don't carry the kind of bitterness people might expect from a story like this one. What I carry instead is something closer to clarity. I learned, in the most painful way a man can learn it, that love without verification is just hope wearing a nice suit. I built an $80 million portfolio by never signing a deal I hadn't fully diligenced, never trusting a number I hadn't independently confirmed, never assuming good faith from a counterparty until the paperwork backed it up. And somehow, for 16 years, I extended a level of unverified trust to my own marriage that I would never have extended to a business partner, and it cost me almost everything that actually mattered. I don't regret calling Garrett Sloan that night. I don't regret the 2 weeks of careful, quiet preparation before I said a single word to Renata about what I knew. Some people will watch this and say I was cold, calculating that a real man would have confronted his wife the moment he saw that text light up on the kitchen island. Maybe. But I think there's a different kind of strength and patience in protecting what you've built before you let your anger decide your next move. The version of me that confronted her immediately. The version that screamed and broke things and acted out of pure wounded pride. That version probably loses half the portfolio in a messy settlement. Probably loses primary custody arguments to an attorney smart enough to paint him as unstable. Probably spends the next 2 years in court instead of the next 8 months quietly rebuilding a life with his kids. The version of me that waited, that documented everything, that let her say the words out loud before he said a single word back. That version protected his children's future. Protected an innocent 71-year-old woman's medication coverage even when he didn't have to, and walked out the other side of the worst betrayal of his life with his business intact, his children secure, and his sense of self fully recovered. Renata thought she'd found a man who didn't care about money, a man who would love her without all the complications my world had built around her. Maybe she did find that, for a little while, before it fell apart the way most things built on a lie eventually do. What she didn't understand, until the moment Carmela picked up that phone call in my kitchen, was that the man she'd married had spent 25 years learning exactly how to protect what was his, and that loving someone deeply never once meant being foolish about how you verify that love is being returned in kind. Some nights, after the kids are asleep, I still sit in my office and look out at the Houston skyline, the buildings I helped fill with tenants, the deals that built the life my children are growing up inside of, and I think about that Tuesday in March. The way her face went white, the way she reached for legal arguments mid-collapse, the sound of that wine glass shattering against the Italian tile. I don't think about it with anger anymore. Mostly I think about it the way you think about a deal that went sideways and somehow still closed in your favor. A hard lesson, expensive in every way that matters, but one I walked away from standing upright, with my children's hands in mine, and a clarity about what real love requires that I don't think I ever would have earned any other way. Hey, real quick before you go, I want to say something about this one. The part that gets me every time I write stories like this isn't the revenge, it's how long people wait to trust their gut. Holloway noticed the small stuff for months before he ever acted on it. And honestly, most of us do that. We see the signs, we talk ourselves out of them, and we only move once we can't unsee it anymore. If there's one thing I hope you take from this, it's don't ignore your gut, but don't act on anger either. Get your facts straight first. That's the real power move. Anyway, let me know down in the comments. Would you have confronted her right away or played it patient like he did? Drop your thoughts below. And if you're new here, hit subscribe because we've got a lot more of these coming.